Hey guys, how's it going? This is Natnator, and welcome to another Creepypasta reading. This story isn't officially a creepypasta, but was actually written by a fellow viewer of this channel like yourself. This story is titled The First Encounter, written by Jona TheRisen. Now as always, turn out the lights, get comfortable, and let the story begin. On November 2nd, 1920, there was a massacre in my hometown of Ocoee, Florida, a backwater town 30 or so minutes away from Universal and Disney. A black man named Moses Norman attempted to vote at the local voting station for the presidential election. A mob searched for him later in the day and brutally murdered a close friend of his, one Julius Perry, believed to be housing Norman. By the end of the weekend, over 500 African American citizens were killed. There were columns of smoke in the air from burning buildings. One such building was Norman's home, a house that is just down the street from my house. No, Norman was never found. Some say he escaped and went to seek refuge in another state. Other people believe that he got lost in the woods and died of starvation. No one really knows. There is a legend told in hushed voices around my neighborhood, passed from child to child in dark corners. It was said that the spirit of the man still haunted the house where he used to live. The kids around the neighborhood took to calling it the Norman House. My brother decided one night that he, myself, and our friend Brendan would spend the night there and see if the legend was true. We asked our mother if we could spend the night at Brendan's. He was the closest to the Norman House, living just a house down. The only thing dividing us from the scorched building was a 2-minute walk through trees and vines. So when Brendan's mother and father fell asleep, we walked out the front door and headed toward the woods. The full moon made it easy to see in the dark, but cast chilling shadows across the ground. Crickets chirped all around us, drowning out the sound of branches breaking under our feet. My brother was ahead of Brendan and I, so I quietly whispered to him, "How does the story go again?" "The red-eye, green-eye story?" Brendan stepped over a fallen branch, then looked over at me. I nodded, and Brendan sighed, looking ahead. "So, the guy is said to have 2 different colored eyes. The right one is green, the left one is red. If you see the green eye first, you have the chance to look away, and then you have to avoid being killed by him until sunrise. If you see the red eye, your soul is stolen, and you get dragged away and he eats you alive." We walked in silence for a moment, listening to the sound of crickets. Looking ahead, I saw that my brother had already arrived at the foundation of the house, and was leaning against a tree trunk waiting for us. We walked the rest of the way in silence, and when we were standing in front of David, he turned around and stepped onto the stone floor. The only thing that remained of the Norman house was the square of concrete that we were planning to spend the night. My brother sat down in the middle of what seemed to be the living room and looked around. Brendan pushed past me and sat down next to him, turning on his flashlight and shining it in my face. "Dude, turn it off. That's not cool." I covered my face with both my hands, waiting for him to turn it off. I heard the click and uncovered my face. Brendan smiled stupidly, but didn't turn the flashlight back on. I tried to blink away the dots in my vision. "Thank you, Jesus." "Shut up, Andrew," my brother said, looking over at a crack in the concrete. He traced it with his finger and made a sharp whistle. It was soft, but in the emptiness it sounded like an atomic bomb. "Do you see this crack in the ground? Whatever made this must have had claws as thick as my fingers. He raised his hand for emphasis, showing his pink sausages that passed his fingers. It's probably just a crack. Don't try and freak me out. Even though I knew deep down that there was nothing in these woods that could possibly hurt me. I felt the cold tendrils of fear curl up in my stomach. The fear was evident in my voice. I caught myself checking over my shoulder, looking for a danger that was not there. I inspected the ground at my feet and saw oddly shaped white rocks all over the floor. I leaned down to study one and rubbed my hand on a flat rock that was about the length of my pinky. I turned it over in my hand. My thumb glided along the smooth surface. I remember thinking it was way too smooth, unnaturally smooth. I dropped the rock and sat down next to my brother and his friend. I crossed my legs and waited for someone to say something. David was still messing around with the crack in the floor. Brendan was pulling some weeds out of the concrete. It was obvious that we were all bored, and it was me who finally broke the silence. Are we staying here all night? I asked, looking over at my brother. He looked back at me, a grin on his face. It was the same crazy grin he got before he did something that would result in me being hurt in some way or wetting my pants. Or until one of us gets eaten by Red-Eye Green-Eye. He turned his attention back to the crack in the floor. I swallowed a lump in my throat. Fear continued to well up inside me. I looked over at Brendan and saw he'd managed to pull out all the weeds within his reach. He looked about as bored as I felt. Don't worry, my brother continued, his voice ominous and disturbing. I'm sure old Red-Eye will be coming before too long. What makes you say that? Brendan asked curiously. Do you know something I don't? No, not really. He stood up and started to walk into the woods. I'll be back. I'm going to take a piss. Don't get eaten, I said, trying to sound clever. David turned to face me, insanity playing across his features. Same to you. He walked off into the darkness, his chubby form slowly turning into a black blob, then into nothingness. Thinking back on it later, I realized that my brother normally didn't walk too far off when he took a piss. He was pretty shameless. Well, want to play a prank on David? I asked Brendan, who smiled. I felt the icy pit of fear melt in my stomach. Sure, why not? Might make this night worth it. Do you have any idea what we could do? I looked in the direction that my brother had gone. He was still too far to be seen. I had hoped that meant he was too far to hear our hushed conversation. How about you stay sitting here and I'll hide somewhere in the trees. When he comes back, you tell him that Red-Eye came and dragged me off. Then, when he's freaking out, I'll make some noise over there. He pointed in the direction directly behind me. By throwing a rock or something, and I'll jump out and scare him when he goes to investigate. Okay, that's better than what I was thinking. I walked closer to the middle of the concrete slab. Hurry up and hide. I think I hear him coming. I looked over toward the direction that my brother had walked off in, and could make him just out in the darkness. I watched as David grew closer and closer. Attempting to fake fear, I struggled to prevent myself from giggling and turned away from him. A minute or so later I could hear his footsteps behind me. I counted to 20 before speaking. Red-Eye dragged off Brendan, I said without looking back at him. My smile would have given the prank away. We have to go save him. There was a sound directly behind me. A sound that even as I'm writing this 6 years later, sends shivers down my spine. It was the sound of teeth grinding bone. Then, just as I was about to turn and face the noise, it stopped. Moments later, I heard something small fall to the floor behind me. Something wet and solid. I was immobilized by fear as I suddenly realized why the rocks felt so strange. They weren't rocks at all. They were bones, ground into smooth pebbles. "Please, don't hurt me," I said, covering my face with my hands and putting my head against my knees. "Please, just go away." I heard the muffled sound of a creature slithering across the ground, rustling and breaking the small pieces of bone. First the sound was to my right, but a little behind me. Then, as I started to cry, the creature was right next to me. I could hear inhuman breathing right next to my head, and could feel dry, cold breath that smelled like a rotted corpse move my hair. Suddenly, the bushes to the right of me rustled, and the creature turned its head. Through the cracks of my fingers I could see a bright red and green light coming from its eyes. The creature seemed to taste the air with its long, snake-like tongue. Then, with a sound like curtains being ripped from a window, the creature tore through the air in the direction of the bushes. I uncovered my face, just in time to see a black, fleshy cape, that I could only assume was Red-Eye, crawl over the bush and look around. The second its hooded head was facing away from me, I jumped to my feet and started to run in no particular direction. Just as I made it to the edge of the house's foundation, I tripped over something large and mushy. I landed in a warm pool of sticky liquid and took a deep breath. The smell of blood filled my nostrils, and I quickly covered my mouth to stifle a scream. My brother lay dead in front of me, with his dark, dead eyes staring back at me, and mouth opened in a silent scream. I rolled over, trying not to gag as I got to my feet and started running again. I didn't look back to see if the creature was following me. I was scared that should I look back, I'd be caught and eaten alive. My right foot stepped over into the soft grass, and I charged forward at top speed. I was so focused on charging forward that I didn't register the spontaneous change in scenery. I ran face first into the bunk bed at Brendan's house, fell over onto my side, and held my face. I started rubbing my face furious, but, try as I might, I couldn't manage to rub the pain away, and eventually it faded on its own. Rolling onto my back, I looked up at the ceiling, watching the white roof go in and out of focus as the ceiling fan rotated. I listened to the sound of the creaking old house and tried to calm my nerves. I finally managed to calm down and get to my feet, and looking at the top bunk, revealed that no one was there. Same with the bottom bunk. I didn't know how I got here, but even though this room said differently, I could feel that I was not alone. I looked toward the open door that led to the dining room. There was a shadowy figure hovering in the open door frame. It was facing away from me, but something told me it would turn around at any moment. I slowly walked backward to the shelf behind me, directly across from the bunk beds. I took step after silent step, and after a small eternity, my hand touched the shelf, and I began searching, with my hand, for the metal baseball bat that my brother Brendan and I used earlier in the day to play. Every object I touched fell, making thunderous thuds. I gritted my teeth and continued to search. I didn't want to take my eyes off the creature in the doorframe. My hand closed around cold metal, and I shifted the baseball bat to my right hand. The shadowy figure began to turn slowly to face me, and I could see the bright red and green glow of its eyes. I gripped the bat tightly enough to turn my knuckles white. Then I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, steeling myself to take the creature head on. I opened my eyes and saw the red and green eyes staring back at me. I yelled and charged, swinging my bat wildly. The full force of the bat collided with the creature's flesh, but instead of stopping or bouncing back, it went right through, dragging what I thought was its black skin with it. The red and green light stayed suspended in air and began to swing violently. I lost my balance, my body spun around, and the bat hit the door frame. I dropped the bat and fell flat on my back. The wind knocked out of me. My head slammed into the tile floor. Black dots danced across my vision. The red and green lights blurred until it was just a swinging blob of color. I closed my eyes tightly and opened them quickly. My vision was clear, and I looked up to see that someone, or something, had tied red and green Christmas lights around a puffy ball of red and black fabric. The lights swung back and forth, and I just stared up at the lights until my head stopped throbbing. Just when I was ready to stand up, a drop of cool, sticky red fluid dropped from the light and landed on my cheek. I reached up and touched the fluid, putting my hand into my field of vision, revealing that it was blood. My eyes jumped back up at the lights, which had slowed down enough to make out the fabric. Staring back at me, with lifeless eyes, was Brendan's cat Knuckles. Its jaw had been torn off, and its chest looked as though something had torn into it and eaten the organs inside. The only meat that remained in the cat's body was attached to its exposed ribs. Horrified, I closed my eyes and told myself that I was imagining things. I blinked hard and looked again. Knuckles continued to swing back and forth, while I laid there, staring up at the mutilated carcass, my mouth hanging open. I tried to scream, but nothing came out of my mouth. I tried to roll over and get to my feet, but nothing happened. My body refused to obey me. Immobilized by shock and fear, I was unable to look away. The string supporting Knuckles snapped, and the feline fell, exposed chest first, right into my open mouth. The taste of iron filled my mouth, instantly causing me to jump to my feet. The cat fell to the floor, and I bolted toward the front door, pausing to spit blood all over the dining room table. I grabbed the handle, yanked the door open, and ran through it. Instead of stepping into the cool night, I found myself in the room of Brendan's parents. I turned around to see a brick wall where the door should be. Looking back, I saw, hovering over Carrie and Jonathan's sleeping bodies, the black body of Red-Eye. Its tongue scraped the side of Carrie's face, leaving black sores everywhere it touched. The creature's red and green eyes glowed like street lamps, illuminating the whole room. Its tattered clothing waved like a flag in the wind, but the window was closed. Suddenly, the creature seemed to sense my presence, and its gray head twisted around to face me. The second I saw the edge of the red eye, I looked across the room to the door of the restroom. I wondered if walking through the door would make me appear in another place, or if I would find myself trapped in the one-door bathroom. I decided to take the risk and sprinted straight toward the bathroom door. Red-Eye was on the other side of the bed, but he slithered across the wall and managed to get in front of me. I closed my eyes. The red light of his gaze blinded me for a split second, despite being blocked out by my eyelids. I ducked under where I believed his body to be and charged through the door. I opened my eyes the moment the red light disappeared. revealing that I was once again outside. I was surrounded by trees, and there were pine cones at my feet. I looked around to see if Red-Eye had followed me. There was nothing but the sound of rustling leaves and distant crickets. I started jogging forward, hoping that I could get out of the woods and find my way back home. I ran until my lungs burned. Leaning over my knees, I coughed violently. My body rocked, and I was heaving. I felt the taste of iron in my mouth. My vision became glossy, and I couldn't make out anything except a red haze. I continued to cough until it turned into a gag, and I started to puke. The contents of my stomach were all over the ground before the puking stopped. My throat was raw, and my vision was redder than when I started hurling. I wiped my eyes and looked ahead, right into the peering gaze of Red-Eye. I gasped, my lungs stinging as though I was breathing in razor blades. The creature's head twisted around. Fear petrified me. The sound of bones snapping was all I could hear. My entire field of vision was a blinding red and green smug. I could almost feel myself being pulled closer to the creature. I heard a scream. A girly, squeaky squeal. The sound came from behind me, and it shocked me back to the terrifying reality that was all round. My head snapped around and I saw Brendan, his eyes glowing with a white light. "Brendan!" I screamed at what should have been the top of my lungs. Instead, all that came out of my mouth was silence. I tried again and again to call out to my friend, but the most that could escape my cracked lips was a whisper. I tried to stand, but my legs turned into lead. All I managed to do was ball my hand into a fist, turn around and throw a punch toward the creature. My body responded, but in slow motion. It was like I was in a pool of syrup. Red-Eye's mouth unhinged like an anaconda, revealing row after row of cracked, jagged teeth. Beyond the teeth was nothing but empty blackness, like I was staring into the reaches of hell itself. My fist slowly moved through the night air. When it was inches from the creature's veined grey face, my voice could finally be heard. When my knuckle was an inch from the leathery surface, the creature's eyes went out spontaneously. Red-Eye slithered around my body and toward my defenseless friend. I was left alone in the dark, my fist making contact with empty air. I turned to watch my friend be dragged off by the slithering monster. I chased after them, but as soon as I took my first step, I tripped over a branch and landed face first. I recovered and set both hands on the ground, feeling not grass, but shag carpet. I lifted my head and saw Red-Eye dragging my friend into his bedroom closet. Brendan didn't resist, letting himself be dragged away by the monster. I started to stand, but was too late to save him from the torture that no doubt awaited him. Red-Eye looked at me for a moment, both of his eyes void of light. Where the creature's eyes should be was torn flesh, as though they had been ripped out. I stared into their darkness, frozen in place as he raised one fleshy finger to his black lips. He set the talon-like limb to his mouth as if telling me to be quiet. Slowly he started to smile. His lips ripped open and began oozing purple blood. The more he smiled, the more I felt filled with terror, and it seemed that with this simple act he was saying that I would see him again. Red-Eye dropped my friend, and Brendan started screaming as soon as his head hit the floor. It was the scream that I believe a person made as they were torn apart. The creature grabbed the doorknob, and his head twisted around as he closed it. The sound of teeth tearing into flesh filled the air. I ran to the door and yanked on the handle as hard as I could. It didn't budge. Its handle refused to turn. I pulled over and over again, but after hours all I managed to do was collapse on the floor. Brendan never stopped screaming, though when the sound of flesh being torn changed into bone being ground, he grew louder and more shrill. I knew that nothing but small white rock-shaped pieces of his bone would remain. I covered my ears, stared at the door and waited for the creature to emerge, my friend reduced to a pile of pebbles. For hours I rocked back and forth, my hands doing nothing to rid me of the screams. An eternity passed before the first light of day could be seen through the window. A moment later, Brendan's screaming stopped. I removed my hands from my ears and heard the lock click. The door swung open, and I crawled on my hands and knees to look inside. Shocked, I stopped dead in my tracks. Laying on the floor was a sleeping Brendan, his skin completely unharmed, his body undamaged. I watched as he slept. Before he woke up, my brother walked into the room. When I attempted to question him about the night, he explained that he slept on the couch. Further questioning revealed nothing more than that when he returned from his piss break, the two of us were gone. He walked back to the house and slept on the couch, hoping to scare us later in the night, but had fallen asleep. By the time my brother finished talking, Brendan woke up, and when I asked him what he remembered from the night before, his eyes grew dark and hazy. Deep frown lines appeared on his face, and he spoke in a voice that was barely a whisper. "I remember everything." Brendan never said another word about the night that he was eaten alive. Once, when I had tried to ask him about it, he told me I was insane and kicked me in the nuts. He laughed, but it was dull and forced, and I knew that he still remembered. I know that I will never forget. My brother was spared the wrath of Red-Eye Green-Eye. 6 years later, I sit at my dining room table, writing my story. Every day I walk by the trees that hide that slab of concrete. Every time I'm near it, I can feel it calling to me. Today, I came to a decision. I'm going to return to Norman House, and this time I'm going to drive a knife into the monster's colorless forehead and watch as purple blood pools on the ground.